I was just about to close up shop, the wrench in my hand a familiar weight, when the sound of an engine caught my attention. It wasn't the usual rattle of a beat-up old truck. This was something different. A sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of the garage, its polished surface gleaming even in the fading light. My heart skipped a beat. There was something about this car that screamed money, and I knew instantly this wasn't the kind of customer I usually got. The door opened, and out stepped the driver, a man dressed in a tailored suit that screamed high-class city life. His posture was perfect, like he was used to being in control of every situation. I couldn't help but notice the way he carried himself, the confidence oozing from him. This wasn't the sort of person who usually came to me for repairs, but here he was. Trouble with the car? I asked, wiping my hands on my rag. I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. I wasn't used to this kind of customer. Yeah, he said, stepping closer. His gaze was sharp, sizing me up, and I couldn't quite read him. I was hoping you could take a look. It's a bit more than I can handle on my own. I studied him for a moment before nodding. I can do that. But if it's anything too fancy, I might have to disappoint you. I'm just a mechanic. He chuckled softly, but there was something in his laugh, something dark. I'm sure you're more than capable. I moved toward the car, popping the hood. As I did, I felt his eyes on me, on my hands, on the way they moved, the way I worked. There was something about him, something unsettling. His gaze was like a slow burn, and the more I tried to focus on the car, the more I felt him pulling me in. I could feel the tension thickening between us. Every word he spoke seemed calculated, probing, like he was trying to figure me out, and I was too distracted by the fact that he had the sort of presence that could shatter any walls I'd built up. After a while, he came closer, leaning against the car in a way that made my pulse quicken. You seem different from most people around here, he said, his voice low. I looked up at him, narrowing my eyes. I'm just a guy fixing cars. Nothing more. He smirked. I didn't say there was anything wrong with that. But I've seen your type before. You're not what you seem. I felt my blood run cold. There was no way he could know anything about me. But something in the way he looked at me, like he was seeing through every layer of my exterior, made me question everything. You're not from around here, I muttered, trying to focus on the engine, but his presence was too overpowering. No, he said, stepping closer, his body just inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off of him. But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy a little company. His voice was suddenly softer, more dangerous, like he was daring me to test him. I don't know what possessed me, but before I could even think to stop myself, I spun around and closed the distance between us. Our lips collided in a kiss that seared through me, scorching every thought. It wasn't gentle or restrained. It was fierce, urgent, raw, desperate, as if we'd both been holding our breath, waiting for that precise moment when the world would fall away and the tension between us could finally snap. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just the primal need to feel the heat, to drown in the burning connection that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Every inch of my skin felt alive, every nerve on fire as I melted into the kiss, the world outside of us completely forgotten. I don't know how long we kissed, but when we pulled away, I was breathless, my hands shaking. He looked at me, eyes dark with something I couldn't name, and for a moment I forgot about the car, about everything. Your trouble, I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. I didn't want to admit it, but it was the truth. He smiled, and it was almost predatory. I don't think you realize how much. The night had been a whirlwind of passion. We didn't stop at the kiss. No, it went further, deeper. What started as an unspoken challenge between us became something much darker. I wasn't sure what had come over me, but when I saw him looking at me that way, I couldn't resist. I didn't want to. By the time morning came, The weight of what we'd done was starting to sink in. His suit was crumpled on the floor next to mine, and I was lying next to him, trying to make sense of everything. "What was that?" I asked, my voice hoarse, still trying to process what had happened. Beaufort, because that's who he was, Beaufort, turned his head, looking at me with that same smirk. "I think you know exactly what it was." His words sent a chill down my spine, and for a brief second, I regretted what we'd done. But then the memory of his hands, his lips, flooded my mind, and all my doubts faded. But there was something else hanging in the air. Something darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than just his suit, his money, and his charm. He wasn't who he said he was, and neither was I. "Who are you really?" I asked. Beaufort's expression shifted. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that didn't belong. He didn't answer right away, and the silence between us grew heavy. "I think you already know," he finally said, his voice tight. I felt my stomach drop. The words he didn't say hung between us, and for a moment, I feared the truth. "Drew," he said, his voice cold now, "you don't remember, do you?" I froze. "You were hired to kill me, weren't you?" He said it so casually, like it was nothing, but the words hit me like a slap. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. Everything went still. My blood ran cold. My past had caught up with me, and now it was threatening to tear apart everything I'd just discovered. Everything I wanted to feel. I wanted to deny it. Hell, I tried with every ounce of strength in me. But the memories slammed into me like a tidal wave, overwhelming my every thought. It had been years since I'd been hired to kill him. A simple job. A clean kill. No questions asked. Just business. But as I trailed Beaufort, day after day, something inside me shifted. At first, it was just about the job. I told myself I was doing it for survival, that this was the only way out of the mess I'd created. But the more I watched him, the more I saw behind the mask he wore, the more I realized I couldn't do it. I followed him through the shadows, keeping my distance. But each time I saw the way he carried himself, how his eyes carried stories that no one else saw, it felt like a crack was forming in my resolve. And then it happened. One moment, one look, and I realized I was no longer just watching him. I was feeling him. Every movement, every breath, every flicker of his gaze, they all tangled with something deep inside me that I couldn't control. I tried to fight it, tried to remind myself that I was here to end him. But the harder I fought, the more the truth became clear. I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill him. I had fallen for him. That was years ago. But the guilt, the ache of knowing I had been sent to destroy the one person I now couldn't live without, still gnawed at me. My decision had been made long before I had the chance to change it, and now I was living with the weight of that betrayal, unable to erase the past, unable to undo the choice I made, even as it was slowly consuming me from the inside out. And now standing in front of me was the very man I had been hired to kill. Beaufort. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of something deeper. Something personal. I wasn't. My words failed me, and I had to swallow hard. I wanted to run. I wanted to pretend this didn't happen. But I couldn't. Beaufort took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You were supposed to kill me, Drew. And now here we are." He paused, the tension crackling between us like an electric charge. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that I think you still want me. Despite everything." I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. The truth was staring me in the face, and I had no choice but to face it. I didn't know what this was between us, but I couldn't walk away now. Not from him. Not from the feeling he stirred in me. The more I tried to distance myself, the closer he seemed to get. Beaufort wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. Every time I tried to walk away, it felt like the universe pulled me back to him, like some invisible thread between us was tugging relentlessly. He was like a shadow, always lurking at the edge of my consciousness, impossible to escape. I thought I could shake off the ghosts of my past, the mistakes, the lies, the blood. But no matter how far I ran, they had a way of finding me, and Beaufort was part of that haunting past. The very man I had been hired to kill, standing before me, playing some twisted game with my heart and my mind. The idea of him and what he represented was suffocating, and yet his presence was a constant temptation I couldn't resist. The nights were the hardest. When the darkness settled over the world, I would lie awake, my mind racing with thoughts of him. I tried to push him out of my head, to focus on anything but him. But every time I closed my eyes, it was his face I saw. It wasn't just the dangerous allure of his touch, his kiss, that kept me awake. It was the question that gnawed at me like a festering wound. Why didn't I kill him? Beaufort had a way of making me question myself, my actions, my very purpose. It was as if he saw the parts of me I had buried deep, the pieces of my soul I had kept hidden for so long. He knew exactly where to touch, where to prod to get under my skin. And every time I tried to shut him out, I felt his pull even more, like I was being dragged towards something inevitable, something I couldn't change, no matter how much I wanted to. I remember that night, the night he asked the question that would change everything. We were sitting in his suite, the city lights causing shadows against the walls. He had his feet propped up on the coffee table, an expensive glass of whiskey in his hand. But he wasn't drinking. He wasn't looking at the glass either. His eyes were focused on me, studying me as if he could read my every thought. And in that moment, I hated how much I let him. His voice broke the silence between us, quiet but piercing. Why didn't you kill me? I froze, the air around me suddenly thick and suffocating. The question was so simple, so blunt, yet it hit me with the force of a freight train. His eyes never left mine, and I could see the intensity in them. This wasn't just curiosity. This was something deeper, something personal. I swallowed hard, the weight of his gaze making my throat tighten. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to admit that I'd failed at my mission, that I couldn't pull the trigger. But there was no avoiding the truth. Not with him. Not now. I don't know, I said, the words slipping out like a confession I hadn't meant to make. My voice sounded foreign to me, like I wasn't the one speaking. But in that moment, I felt as if the weight of all the lies I told myself was finally crashing down. I don't know why I didn't finish it. He sat up straighter, his gaze sharpening, the question hanging in the air like a live wire. You had the chance, he repeated, his voice low but thick with something I couldn't identify. I was there, vulnerable, defenseless. And you let me go. I wanted to fight back, to make excuses, but I couldn't. The truth was there, staring me in the face, and I couldn't deny it any longer. I had let him go. I had been paid to end his life, but somewhere in the middle of that dark, twisted job, something had shifted. Maybe it was his eyes, the way he looked at me, as if he saw through the facade I'd built for so long. Maybe it was the way he didn't flinch, didn't beg for mercy like I expected him to. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the connection we shared that I couldn't explain even now. I couldn't do it, I whispered, the words heavy on my tongue. I didn't have it in me. Beaufort didn't say anything for a long time. The silence between us stretched, thick with unspoken words, until I thought I might suffocate in it. I couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't look at him. Not now. Not after everything I'd just admitted. But I felt his presence like a storm, swirling around me, closing in, pushing me to the edge. And then in that silence, I felt something shift, something I couldn't quite grasp. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. There was something else there, something far more dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost too soft, and I had to lean in to hear it. You don't regret it, do you? I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were darker now, filled with a quiet understanding that made my pulse race. It was as if he knew me better than I knew myself. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was a mistake, that I regretted letting him live. But the truth was I didn't know. There was a part of me that regretted it, the part that had been conditioned to follow orders without question, without hesitation. But there was another part of me, the part that had kissed him, that had felt something in that kiss that couldn't be explained, that didn't regret it at all. I don't know, I finally said, the words feeling like a betrayal. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Beaufort didn't reply, but the silence between us spoke volumes. He didn't need to say anything else. The tension was thick enough to choke us both. I knew I wasn't getting off easy. I knew he wouldn't let me walk away from this. He stood up then, slowly, deliberately, like a predator closing in on its prey. I'm not going to let you off the hook, Drew, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You can't keep running from this. From me? I could feel the weight of his words in my chest, each syllable a hammer blow that echoed in the silence. And in that moment I knew I was caught. There was no escape. I was tangled in this web of lies, guilt, and desire, and there was no way out. Beaufort stepped closer, and I could feel his breath on my skin, hot and steady. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, sending a jolt of electricity through my veins. I think you want me to stay, he murmured, his voice low, almost seductive. And I think you're terrified of what happens next. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But deep down I knew he was right. I was terrified. Terrified of what I had become. Terrified of the man standing before me. And terrified of the truth that lay between us. Because the ghosts of our past were closing in, and neither of us was ready for the storm that was coming. Then in an instant, Beaufort moved closer to me, and his hand tightened on mine, his thumb stroking the back of my hand in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray, held mine captive, searching for some sign of weakness, of surrender. I felt a tremor run through me. A strange mix of fear and longing. I wanted to pull away, to deny the pull I felt towards him, but my body betrayed me. My breath hitched, and I leaned into his touch, the scent of his cologne, a heady mix of sandalwood and something musky, swirling around me. He leaned in, his lips touching mine in a feather-light touch. I closed my eyes, the world fading away as his lips finally met mine. The kiss was a whirlwind, a desperate, hungry dance of two souls yearning for something forbidden. His tongue traced the contours of my mouth, demanding entrance, and I parted my lips, surrendering to the intoxicating sensation. He tasted of whiskey and sin, a dangerous combination that ignited a fire within me. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, desperate for more. He groaned, his hands moving down my back, exploring the curves of my body. His touch was a wildfire, igniting a burning need within me that I couldn't control. We stumbled towards the bed, a desperate urgency guiding our movements. He pushed me down gently, his body hovering over mine. I reached for him, my fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, the planes of his chest. He undressed me with trembling hands, his eyes burning with a possessive hunger that both terrified and exhilarated me. As he joined me on the bed, the world seemed to melt away. There was only him, his body pressed against mine, his skin hot against mine. He moved inside me slowly, deliberately, each thrust a slow, agonizing pleasure. I cried out, the sound muffled by the sheets, lost in the ecstasy of the moment. We moved as one, our bodies a symphony of movement and desire. The room was filled with the sounds of our passion, the soft moans, the ragged breaths, the rhythmic pounding of our hearts. Afterwards, we lay on the bed, breathless and spent. He held me close, his arm wrapped around me protectively. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time, a fragile sense of belonging. I couldn't stay away from him. No matter how hard I tried to keep my distance, Beaufort kept pulling me back in. It was like a drug, and I was addicted to it. But I knew something was going to give. The past had a way of catching up, and I couldn't keep hiding from it. Every moment I spent with him, every touch, every kiss, only made the truth harder to face. And now I was stuck between the man I had been hired to kill and the man I couldn't seem to stay away from. A dangerous game that neither of us could win. I could feel the tension building, and deep down I knew the end was coming. How it would end, though? I didn't have the slightest clue. But one thing was for sure, whatever happened, I wasn't walking away from this.